meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board on March 18th. What we're going to do, just as a quick reminder, is we're going to do public comment just so those who've shown up to do that know what time it is and they're not sitting around waiting for the workshop agenda to finish. When that is done, my intent is to suspend the action meeting, return to the workshop meeting, complete our final two presentations, at which point we will go back to the agenda on the action meeting to go through those various resolutions. So the first order of business is public comment. Carol, this is everybody? Okay, we have one individual signed up for public comment. That is Mr. Stuart Schwartz. And Mr. Schwartz, I would just ask that you keep your remarks to 3 minutes, which is something we ask everyone speaking before the board to do, so that everyone has equal treatment and equal amounts of time to make their comments.
Thank you, Secretary Donahue, members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Now, I'm also on the board of the Virginia Conservation Network and the board of the Partnership for Smart Growth here in Richmond. So I've done some work across the state. Yesterday, Secretary Donahue talked about the conversations between Democrats and Republicans to Speaker Howell and Governor McAuliffe in 2014 that resulted in Smart Scale. Well, Trip Pollard, who's back here and also may want to speak, and I were in a meeting with Speaker Howell, and I still remember him saying to this day, "I'm tired of local governments handing me a bill for all their bad land use planning." And that was after the big funding in 2013, and he was very worried about the money being wasted. I often call myself an environmental fiscal conservative because I'm with him. And the spread out auto-dependent development we're seeing, and it keeps repeating itself in the next county over, the next county over, is handing you all a big bill, a bill you'll never be able to fully pay, as you see when you see these long lists of projects. This resulted in Smart Scale, but we still have the problem that there's never going to be enough money. So we need more efficient land use. And way back in 2007, in another bipartisan effort, they defined urban development areas, subdivision street connectivity requirements, and other ways to reduce the impact on the roadways that you all fund. Because often the private sector has closed roadway systems and they send all their traffic onto the arterials and ask Mr. Rich over here to keep widening that arterial or give them a new interchange, and it's not going to work without connectivity. So we need to have more efficient land use. You need to focus your infrastructure dollars that are scarce on fixing it first, and Virginia has a good, strong maintenance-first approach. You also need to harden your infrastructure against flooding, higher rates of flooding, sea level rise, heat. And I also want you to think about a couple other things. The regional authorities are not responsible for maintenance. They are approving and expanding lane miles left and right, but handing you all the bill for the maintenance. We need to account for how much additional maintenance that will require and who's going to pay for it. We'd also argue that the commercial corridors, where Senator Van Valkenburg and Delegate Helmer had wanted to put more housing in a by right mode, are great places for more housing, but they also need to be places with great transit, walkability, and so forth. So I'll stop there. The bottom line being land use and transportation are connected. You need to have a conversation with your local governments who keep handing you a bill, and we need more efficient approaches so that our costs for transportation don't continue to escalate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Before we conclude this portion of the action meeting, I wanted to see if there are any individuals in the audience who also wanted to make public comment. When you please come up, identify yourself, and then again, please limit your remarks to 3 minutes.
Carol was quick on taking the sign-up sheet away. Trip Pollard with Southern Environmental Law Center, and we work throughout Virginia to advance cleaner, more equitable transportation, as well as a safer and more resilient transportation system. We've advocated for and supported many of the policies this board has adopted and General Assembly has adopted over the years, such as Stuart just mentioned, we were very involved with the formation of the Smart Scale process, which I'll spend a lot of time talking about yesterday. As the Secretary said, it's a nationally recognized, super successful process, but there's always room for further tweaks and improvement. We've also long supported emphasis on maintenance as well as passenger rail. Mr. Stant, we put out a report a number of years ago calling for the Commonwealth corridor you asked about yesterday. We'd love to see it sooner. And we also support greater emphasis on design changes to increase and improve safety, as well as promoting more transit-oriented development and linking land use and transportation. We're still working on getting a healthy dose of transit funding, hopefully from the General Assembly in the budget. You heard a lot about the challenges in Northern Virginia yesterday. I just emphasize that the problems go beyond Northern Virginia. Statewide transit agencies are facing funding crunch. As is to be expected, the problem is more severe in Northern Virginia. Larger system is more expensive. This past session, we also supported legislation we worked with VDOT on that will enable them to assume increased responsibility for preparing NEPA documents. And VDOT has made important strides in improving its environmental review process. But we still have a long way to go. Transportation is the #1 source of climate pollution in Virginia, as well as a number of other harmful emissions. And I urge all of you in your policy decisions to advance a cleaner, more equitable, or more resilient transportation. To give one example on your agenda today is the Nemo Parkway. SELC and our partners, including Lynnhaven River Now, Back Bay Restoration Foundation, and Wetlands Watch, as well as many residents, have problems about this running through the middle of a large wetland floodplain that's bordered both north and south by the Back Bay Wildlife Refuge. We support fixing the existing road, Sandbridge Road, and rather than paving over wetlands and wildlife habitat that have already been impacted. We recently met with VDOT, and we will continue to work with them to try to ensure that if you will do approve this location decision and NIMO moves forward, there are alternatives to reduce that damage to wetlands to the greatest extent possible, such as putting the full length of the road on piles or piers to avoid hydrological blockages and ecological fragmenting that an earthen causeway would inflict. Beyond that specific project, we urge you all to use opportunities such as the upcoming 6-year plan to focus on transportation projects that reduce pollution, improve accessibility, make communities more resilient, and protect public health. And we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other individuals in the audience that would like to provide comment to the board? All right, seeing none, I'm suspending the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. I'm now bringing back the workshop meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. We have 2 presentations this morning. We're going to start with a safety presentation by Stephen Reed with VDOT, as well as Brandy Brubaker from the Department of Motor Vehicles. Mr. Reed. Yeah, and Mr. Reed, before you get going, I just want to make kind of a few remarks. So board members, I started to highlight or foreshadow this yesterday. This is the first of a series of presentations on safety. I really think we have an opportunity over the next several years to make a real difference on the safety area. Just to put things in perspective, this is my 3rd kind of tenure in government. When I came back the second time in 2014, we had 703 highway fatalities. With the exception of last year, we've been over 900 for almost 8 years running. Preliminary figures show that we're going to drop to around 825 last year. That's still almost a 20% increase over 2014. We're seeing those trends in a lot of places across the country, but not everywhere. I do believe we have an opportunity as a board to influence some, not all, of these causes here. And so the purpose of today's presentation is kind of just an understanding of what is actually happening, what are the trends that we are seeing, and then we'll be coming back in future months to talk about what are potential investment strategies, both in infrastructure, but also on the behavioral side, where we can seek to try and influence this outcome and move this needle in the right direction on a long-term trend. If you look out over like a 50-year horizon, highway fatalities are trending down. If you look at over a 15-year horizon, though, we're actually going up in kind of the wrong direction there. And so I really want to make this kind of a concerted focus that we talk about. Again, we do have the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program. So again, as we talk about where is the board's opportunity to influence these outcomes, you as the board approve the investment strategy for that program. We're required to do that once every 5 years. The last strategy was adopted in 2022. And so it's our hope that either later this year or early next year, we will bring to the board a strategy that, based on the discussions we have over the coming months, you feel comfortable adopting, that will identify how we think we can affect the fatalities and severe injuries that we're seeing, crashes that we're seeing across the Commonwealth. I do want to be clear, there may be some things that this board can't fully move the needle on that may require discussions with the General Assembly. That may be an outcome of these discussions. And so as we go through this, again, today we're just saying what is happening, what are we taking away from what's happening, and why do we believe it is happening? There's a whole host of other discussions then that we have to have with the dollars we have available. How can we make the greatest impact with kind of the tools that we have? And some of those tools may not always get at every issue we're going to talk about, but we still have to understand what is happening so we can understand where we can make a difference. DMV is also here. I know you don't hear DMV often before the Commonwealth Transportation Board. The way safety is split up from a responsibility is VDOT has obviously controls infrastructure investments. DMV, though, is the Governor's Highway Safety Office and receives funding from the National Highway, NHTSA. I was going to screw up the acronym there, but the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration for behavioral funding strategies to help kind of encourage types of behaviors like wearing a seatbelt or not drinking and driving to try and reduce fatalities. And so that's why we have both DMV and VDOT here. They each play a role in kind of the two key drivers on whether or not we have better safety outcomes on our highways, which is what the highways look like and how people behave when they use them. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity to speak first thing in the morning, not at the end of the day yesterday. And also, more importantly, the opportunity to talk about our core mission, which is to get people traveling on Virginia's roadways to their destination without any harm. So we're going to be talking a lot about harm and injury today. But first, we have some additional comments, I think, from the secretary. Are you complete now? You're okay. Good. So first, to talk about public health and safety, because of the trauma and the societal costs of traffic crashes, highway safety has been a public health issue since the 1960s. In 1966, we had our first federal Highway Safety Act, and then it was emphasized when NHTSA was formed in 1970. And the first administrator was Dr. Hayden, epidemiologist. And with him and his philosophy, we have been, trying to diagnose crashes and the factors involved with those crashes in order to identify the problems and then determine what we can do to reduce those severe crashes through appropriate treatments. So we treat it as a public health and safety issue combined. Our session will start by looking at the annual trends of those severe crashes to show the trajectory of where we're going, as the Secretary has mentioned, and the size of our safety problem. Next, we'll see some of the safety plans that we have developed to identify where our resources should focus and the actions that we should take. Then I'll finish with a review of two location types and crash types where roadway design and infrastructure can make a difference. How we design, operate, maintain our highway system. Our engineering focuses on human abilities and how vehicles perform, while recognizing that people do make mistakes. We also concentrate on all road users, the drivers, the pedestrians, the riders, and how they interact with each other within the roadway environment. So we'll look at that interaction and the combination of many factors that need our interventions. And then to finish, Ms. Brubaker will provide some examples of behavioral choices that were made before and during travel. We will require the roles of enforcement, education, public messaging, all to change our highway safety culture. And she'll conclude with some next steps as well. So our list of problem areas, or what we call emphasis areas, have not changed for many, many years. They've stayed largely the same. Infrastructure's main role is on crash types at two locations, those related to intersections and those related along roadway segments where vehicles leave the road or their travel lanes. So that includes things like head-on crashes and overturned crashes. We also have a role in vehicle speeds and speeding related to safety of pedestrian bicyclists in particular. Behavioral programs such as training, education, and enforcement include the characteristics of the users, so the young and old, and the more vulnerable pedestrians and bicyclists, as well as specific vehicle types, and of course, the major risky behaviors, impairment, speeding, and seatbelt use. So some of those overlaps have been issues for a long time, but even more noticeable since the pandemic, such as the connection between speeding and not wearing a seatbelt. So we'll look at some examples of how each of these areas can contribute to the overall safety problem and how they interact with each other. First, I'll give you an example of this. We'll look at fatalities involved in roadway departure at over 15,000 over 5 years. So that's 3,000 deaths and serious injuries a year or more. 44% of those also involved a driver that was speeding. According to the reporting police officer, that's someone that's going over the speed limit or going too fast for the conditions, be that weather or congestion or some other condition that's going on at the time of the crash. And so of those 45, in addition to that, 40% of those drivers were also impaired. And so that's a higher number than overall, which is around a third, 30 to 33% of folks that are impaired while driving. So let's look at the trends now and determine.
Mr. Reed, if I could jump in, we're having a bit of a technological issue for those watching online. So we're going to try and fix the slides for 1 second, but if you just give us just 20 or 30 seconds here as the tech folks try and work on that. But again, guys, I hope one of the key takeaways you're getting from that last slide that Mr. Reed presented is it's typically not just one thing that resulted in the crash that resulted in a fatality or severe injury. It's normally a number of types of factors. And so over the coming months, we're going to be, as we talk about strategies, both infrastructure investments as well as behavioral types of investments there, we're looking at how do we get at these two things a lot of times that are coming together to cause this outcome, because it's often not just a single thing that we believe is the root cause of these types of crashes where we're seeing these negative outcomes. Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Secretary. One of the things on the list that I didn't see were distracted, these things.
Yes, sir.
So is that also a part of the calculus in deciding serious injuries and deaths is related to accidents?
Absolutely, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Coleman. So you saw impaired there, correct? That is not just alcohol. So what we do is we combine that, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later. We combine that, what we call the 4 Ds of impairment, which is drunk, but it's also distracted, being drowsy or sleepy, and being drugged. And we kind of combine them because the influence of that, the outcome of that is very similar. When you look down at your phone for 3 seconds, it's probably the same as being intoxicated in terms of your being able to recognize and deal with the road ahead. And so, yes, definitely distraction is a big part of the equation.
Wouldn't decoupling that, though, help understand better? I mean, because if this is on the rise, but maybe drinking and driving is on the decline,
Yes.
wouldn't that be important to know?
Yeah, we decouple it with our programs and our interventions for sure. But when we talk about overall the problem, the societal problem there, we kind of group them together and then we break it out as we drill into it to determine what interventions need to be considered. Yeah.
And it appears that we have fixed the technological issues. So please, Ms. Dunlop.
Yes, I'm just wondering if you could break that out for us before we leave. The impairment issues, what number constitutes drunk driving, what constitutes distracted driving, and what number constitutes drug driving?
I'm hoping my colleague, Ms. Brubaker, can help me with that statistic. I see she stepped out right now, but yeah, I'm hoping she can help me with that because I don't have those numbers in my head.
Okay, I'd like to be able to get that.
Yes, sir.
We can absolutely provide that, Ms. Dunlop, whether before the presentation is over, or sometime shortly this afternoon after the meeting concludes. Mr. Reed?
All right, this slide plots our 2 main performance indicators in terms of severe crashes. The orange line is our fatalities and deaths, and the blue line are the serious injuries, and those are the ones that are typically transported away for trauma care. You might have seen this before on the board as we introduce this data each year when we determine our safety targets for the next year. And so these are 2 federal performance measures that we need to report on every year as well. So the traffic fatalities are deaths that occur within 30 days of the crash. So some of them are in the hospital for a period before they pass away. Serious injuries in the blue are often, as I mentioned, transported away. They require care. There are other injuries recorded by the police officer as minor. Most of those may get care, or they may reject care and leave the scene without the care. Virginia saw, as the Secretary mentioned, the lowest number in 2014 and has since risen through the pandemic and is now declining. But even with that drop that we see here in 2025, there was a traffic death every 10 hours and 40 minutes on our highways. Serious injuries have also decreased since the pandemic. But if you add those in, there was a serious injury or a fatality every 70 minutes. Someone required care and hospital services. So when you combine this in, the economic cost is staggering. We value a life right now, when we do benefit cost analysis that we talked about yesterday, at $17 million. A serious injury at about $1 million. So when you add this up for 2025, or over $20 billion in societal costs a year.
Mr. Coleman?
I see the relationship in 2015 where there was, 8,000 serious injuries and 753 deaths. And then you get to 2025, serious injuries have come down, but deaths have gone up. I thought airbags, seat belts, and other things would help improve the outcomes. What is the reason for more deaths related to serious injuries over that time period?
Mr. Coleman, that is a perfect transition to the next slide.
Okay.
That is a good question, and the issues are because there's more confounding, there's more factors involved with those that result in a fatality. There's more overlapping of those factors, and we'll talk about that as we did with the roadway departure example at the beginning. So this chart shows you the proportion of crashes that result in a fatality. It's sort of a risk measure proportion, if you will. And that proportion in the black line overall has stayed pretty much the same since the early 1990s at about 0.6% up to 0.8 during the pandemic, down to 0.7 in recent years. But when you look at that between the rural network and the urban network, you can see that the risk factor is much higher in the rural areas, although that has receded down now to be lower than pre-2015 to 1.23% in 2025. It increased for fatalities on the urban system during the pandemic, but you can see that it didn't reduce to below pre-pandemic levels. So we still have an elevated risk on our urban roads. And so that gets to the confounding issue that in the urban environment, there's more distractions, there's more pedestrians, there's a lot of things going on in the urban environment that we need to consider in terms of the factors there. So that risk, unfortunately, has stayed elevated since what we've seen in the pandemic, and we'll talk about that as well. This slide talks about our comparison to the nation and our surrounding neighboring states. And so when you look at the orange-blue line in terms of fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles, and that trend pretty much follows the number trend on the last chart. When you look at the gray line for the nation and the blue line for the different states from Delaware down to Georgia that we've included in there, we're below their averages, but it just shows that we have an issue here with many factors beyond what we're doing just in Virginia. It's more of a national a situation in terms of what's going on with safety and driver behavior and the factors that are considered in reducing those fatal crashes. During the pandemic, we looked at a study that looked at what was going on during the pandemic, and they concluded that there was an increase in speeding, DUI, and very interestingly, an increase in unlicensed drivers. And they talked about those that had their license suspended, as well as those that were just purely unlicensed in their study. Further, we speculate that there were more people being active during the pandemic, so we had more pedestrian and cyclist deaths, and they increased during the pandemic as well. And then they saw that urban arterials had the largest increase. So again, that goes back to the risk factor on the last slide, that in the urban areas, our arterials are seeing increased risks.
So Mr. Reed, to Mr. Coleman's question, and then I'll go to Mr. Lawson, some of the reasons perhaps we're seeing some of these things, one, we don't know 100% why, but I think what we suspect is greater levels of speeding. We saw increased DUI activity, as well as kind of increases in unlicensed drivers, as well as reductions in seatbelt use. And so we are suspecting that those are some of the key drivers to why we're seeing a greater percentage of crashes resulting in a fatality, kind of moving forward. And so those are some of the areas we're probably going to ask to focus on as a board as we move forward. We don't have a complete certainty in it, but those are the things that we've seen that have changed. And then we're seeing the percentage of crashes resulting in a fatality going up. And so we're seeing correlation. It's hard to say if that's 100% causation, right? But that is what we suspect are some of the things from a behavioral side that are resulting in these crashes having more fatalities on a per crash basis than we saw in the past. And I think it's very interesting to me that we've seen in the rural areas, the fatalities per crash actually is below where we were pre-pandemic, but we're still almost 20% in our urban areas. And so we've kind of seen an interesting directional change in trends there between the rural areas and the urban areas. Clearly the risk factor is still higher in the rural areas, but the delta between the two has shrunk considerably. And Mr. Lawson, I saw you had a comment.
Yes, thank you. On these averages, I'm assuming we're part of this mid-Atlantic average?
Yes, sir.
How many states are in this?
There's 12. It's from Delaware down to Georgia, and we included the Kentucky and Tennessee.
Can you break this out to see how we compare one-to-one to each one of them?
Absolutely.
And then as a follow-up, to the extent anyone's better, are they doing anything different that perhaps we could learn from?
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
North Carolina is our sort of closest sibling in terms of the way they maintain their roads and the size of their network and the topography and the people. So that's a really good comparison. As you go further north and it's more urbanized, then you get more into the urban area where the risk factors, are slightly lower and not the greatest comparison. But as you go south, definitely there's a good comparison.
Thank you. Love to see it.
All right, one slide back. This slide was compiled by DMV, which goes to the Secretary's comments earlier. We're looking at fatalities here in Virginia back to 1950. And you can see that there is that slight downward trend, but there's also sort of plateaus or leveling areas, and then these increases for a number of years in between, like in the early 70s, and there in that big spike in the late 80s. And most of the leveling that you see came after major intervention at the federal level and probably at the state level as a result of that. So in the 70s, we had the 55 mile an hour speed limit enacted. We had more car legislation in terms of vehicle safety in the mid 70s. And so after 75, you can see that sort of drop that happened there. That spike in 89 was when the 55 was rescinded and we went back to 65. And so there was a year of shock, and then it came back down. So it's very interesting. And so you see the leveling there through the early 2000s, and then a really nice drop that's accentuated in this scale, and then that increase that was mentioned earlier. So the short-term trend is upward, but you can see it coming down as we've seen a couple of times now, and that's partly what I speculate we're seeing is coming out of the bilateral infrastructure law, the bill, and IIJA, and the extra transportation money that we're spending. That 10% that you saw yesterday on the safety program, and the 4% of the federal budget that we get.
Mr. Davis?
While we're on this slide, before we go to the next slide, the vehicle miles traveled, do we capture that and ever express the serious injury and death rate as a percentage, or in relation to the vehicle miles traveled? Because I'm assuming that number has gone up pretty dramatically through the course of time as we continue to build things and add lane miles and build interstates and just continue building out the system. Presumably VMT has to go up, or otherwise we wouldn't be building anything. So do we keep the numbers and stats as it relates to VMT?
Absolutely. We try to normalize it all the time, either by vehicle miles traveled or population.
Mr. Reed, could you just go back to the previous slide? So I think we should be really clear with the board. We are jumping back and forth between raw numbers and this ratio. So if you go back to the previous slide, this one comparing the Commonwealth to our peer states and the national average, this is normalized on a VMT basis. The kind of national trend is you look at fatalities per 100 million VMT. I don't know why they picked 100 million VMT. I'm guessing because it makes the numbers around one.
Yes.
So people can kind of like process it easier in terms of just like thinking about it. But this is looking at, on a relative basis to VMT. And so I think when you look at those changes in from 2015 to 2019, we had more driving, and then we had more fatalities relative to our increase in driving as well. And so when you see that rate going up there, that's, both things are going up, and the fatalities are going up greater than the increase in driving that we're seeing.
Okay, that was thank you for clarifying that, because if we're growing the system and the fatalities are still increasing, or we're increasing at our same rate, higher rate, lower rate, or if we're increasing VMT and deaths are coming down, then we're really doing good, because VMT is going up.
That's right.
Always down. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, no, and we'll do our best, because I know we see these numbers every day, and so we'll just make sure that we're very clear when we're talking about raw numbers versus kind of a ratio and a rate, so that you guys know exactly what you're looking at there. Mr. Coleman?
Thank you, Secretary. You may get to it in a further slide, but I was just, with all the controversy about speed cameras, I think my personal opinion is a better use of resources. We can't hire enough state police to cover some of the behavioral traits. Is that something that is being factored into your analysis to control? Because I know there are a lot of people that are against it. I've seen it in Europe, it works. So I didn't know if that is going to be factored into some of the analysis in terms of controlling behavior.
Absolutely.
Mr. Coleman, I'll handle that one to give Mr. Reed a break on that. So speed cameras is an active discussion with the General Assembly. There's several pieces of legislation that were introduced. Some are still lying within the Assembly and will stay there for another year. Several have been sent to the governor for the administration's consideration between now and April 22nd, when we have what's known as the veto session, where the governor's action on legislation is considered. I think this is something we want to come back and talk to the board about more. A lot of the discussion about speed cameras the General Assembly had was about kind of the checks and balances to make sure that people had a fair amount of due process when they received a particular ticket. So there was a story, for example, about a locally operated speed camera where when the school was on a 2-hour delay, the speed camera was still issuing tickets at the normal school time. I believe, Ms. Sellers, that was somewhere in your neck of the woods there. And so people were saying, like, hey, this isn't fair. If school's actually not operating now, this whole camera thing was supposed to be about making sure school children were safe, and we're still issuing tickets at this time. So a lot of legislation was kind of about those types of due process issues. And then secondarily, there was a big discussion, and Mr. Hutchinson will get into this more, about how the money that is collected is used? Like, should it go to highway safety projects only, or can it be used for kind of general types of purposes? I think we'll be coming back later to show you some of the things we've seen on the speed cameras, particularly on interstates, where VDOT has a role in that, as well as some of the behavioral trends, I'll call it, in terms of compliance with speed limits on some of our interstate highways. And so I think we'll have more to come in some future months on that topic, but it is a live discussion with the General Assembly, and there those trying to repeal any speed cameras, those trying to dramatically expand their use, and those trying to just deal with the ones that exist today and how they're kind of regulated and operated. So it's a very, very live topic at the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Mr. Davis, one more comment on the VMT issue. So you can see here that even though VMT dropped by about 10% during COVID, the rate went up. And so there's a lot more going on with fatalities. It's a bigger challenge. And that's the same challenge that sort of shows up in this long-term. VMT definitely went up from 1950 to 2025. And it is going down, but there's a lot going on with the fatalities in terms of getting those numbers down.
Mr. Minshew.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Starting around 2013 or so, the General Assembly started changing laws with respect to distracted driving, particularly texting while driving. It was a secondary offense for a long time. 2021 or so, it became a primary offense. I'm told our Virginia State Police are even being trained on how to spot drivers who are texting while driving. And I'm just curious, do we have any data that shows if I guess you'd say the criminalization of texting while driving is actually given a therapeutic effect, reducing fatalities and accidents? In other words, any data that shows that the heightened law is working?
That's an interesting, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Mysterio, it's an interesting question. First of all, because when there's a crash in the data that we have, a lot of the times that's a self-reported behavior. And so we do have the crash record of that and those numbers. We can pull those numbers and see if there's been any influence in that, but it's confounded because it is self-reported, so it's underreported in the crash numbers. But we, by surveys of people, AAA does a survey of every few years, and people admit to their behavior, and that really hasn't come down from what I recall from their studies over the last decade.
And Mr. Minshew, I think one of the things you'll hear Ms. Brubaker talk about on the behavioral side, and we'll get into this more in some of the future discussions, is a lot like you were required by law to wear a seatbelt. What we're seeing is less and less people have been doing that over the last decade or so. And so a lot of these policies require kind of additional acts by us to try and encourage compliance with those types of laws. And so I know that's something that DMV, that's really where their focus is in this safety realm. And so Ms. Brubaker, I think, can talk a little bit about it today, but we'll also make sure that's something we talk about more in kind of future meetings. But I think the key thing I would just say is the laws are important, and then it's as important a lot of times that we then go educate and engage the public about those laws and their benefits to encourage more people to follow them. And so I know there's like targeted things DMV has done with regard to like unbelted drivers, particularly in like Southwest Virginia, where we saw really high increases in youth men, for the most part, not wearing seatbelts, and it was having an impact on those safety outcomes. And so they actually partnered with like a local sheriff that was well known to go onto the radio and say, hey guys, wearing your seatbelt's important, here's why. And we saw a measurable change after that was done. The question is like, how often do you have to do those types of interventions to ensure that that effect sustains itself, because it is not self-sustaining forever, unlike kind of an infrastructure treatment where we change the way a road looks, and that for the most part will address the key safety issues we were trying to get at.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, one last slide on the risk of death. And this is about our vulnerable road users. As you can see, in terms of overall crashes, pedestrians only 1.3, but 14% of the crashes result in a death. So that's about 11-fold risk of death for a pedestrian. For bicyclists, it's about a 4-fold, and for motorcyclists, it's about a 7-fold, presumably because of the speed factor with the motorcyclist compared to the pedal cyclist. So when we look at diagnosing problems at locations and collision types, we're interested in those collision types with those vulnerable road users as well as vehicle speeds as an important factor. So for the motorists involved ones on the last slide, we didn't differentiate between different vehicle types, but DRPT has provided this slide to look at transit safety. It was mentioned yesterday in the presentation. And so you can see at the top here from a study from AASHTO that public transit is 10 times safer with a low fatality rate there from their national transit database. But more importantly, in Virginia, in the table below, for all three of their safety measures, transit is lower than the national average, even for those safer commuters and users of the transit system. So in addition to being safe, it also reduces our vehicle miles traveled, so that exposure to a crash, and also, and as a result, less traffic congestion, and also reduce the possibility of someone driving impaired, which is that alcohol, DUI, drowsy, and distracted that we mentioned earlier. All right, let's pivot now to look at the trends and our strategic plan and how we focus in on different emphasis areas in terms of addressing the problem. So since 2006 with SafetyLoo, FHWA has required the VDOT lead a 5-year development of a 5-year strategic highway safety plan. And that's required for us to obligate our federal highway safety improvement funds. Virginia's current plan was developed with guidance from a steering committee that's made up of multiple state agencies, a regional and local representative, as well as a representative from the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police. So after we select our emphasis areas, we worked with NPO and TPO partners in localities and tribal communities to identify and support ongoing activities and any new activities that needed to be included in the plan. Before DOT adopted the safe system approach with our National Highway Safety Strategy in 2022, we pivoted and framed our last strategic plan under what we call the safe system. So I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit here for the next few slides. So we combine the traditional silos of engineering, education, enforcement, emergency response to be more of a blended collaborative approach with this plan.
And so board members, I would encourage you to think about, this is basically the analysis and identification of what's happening, why we think it's happening, that then should be informing the investment strategy that as a board will be adopting, that will guide how we spend the 10% of construction dollars in the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program. And in that program, you are required by law to invest both in infrastructure and in behavioral investments. So just be clear, that's a requirement, both in federal and state law. So I understand there may be opinions about which one should get more or less. There's at least 29% that will go to behavioral strategies without regard to whether you wanted to spend 25 or something less than that. It's 29%. I of course forgot the amount that goes to infrastructure. It's 50 something, I believe. And then there's a discretionary amount that we as the board can either push to infrastructure or push to behavioral, or kind of divide as we kind of see fit there. But this is the analytics that will be informing how we try and spend those dollars as we move forward. The board does not approve this plan, but you approve the follow-on kind of spending of dollars and allocation through that investment strategy in the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Ms. Sellers and then Mr. Lawson.
Just on the second bullet where it says education and then enforcement, perhaps use interventions. I've heard that said. Interventions is more than arresting. It's other things too. So interventions would be my recommendation.
Thank you.
Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Secretary, is a component of this design also? And one thing that strikes me about this is control what we can. It's hard to control behavior of drivers and so on, but we seem to have a rule basically that if we're going to build roads, including arterials, we're going to also add bike lanes and pedestrian ways, which I just think, going back to the earlier slides, that's going to lead to a fatality, especially if you're the guy walking or riding and you get hit by a vehicle. And I'm wondering if we can also throw into this, or if some money could be used to come up with some alternative designs, especially with new development, where we can encourage walkways and bikeways to go internal. If somebody's willing to give up right of way, for example, and pull those trips onto lesser used roads or slower speed roads, or maybe even just dedicated bike or pedestrian ways, and not have the requirement to build this stuff right next to a 55-mile-an-hour road, for example. Do we already look at that, or do we provide that design flexibility if somebody wants to do that?
So, Mr. Lawson, I can't give you a fulsome answer today. What I can say is I do know we have the policy, this board policy, that requires consideration of bicycle and pedestrian accommodations when we are undertaking maintenance or construction work. There are kind of exceptions to that. Like, let's go to the very easy, like far bookend. You shouldn't walk or bike on a limited access highway, right? That's actually illegal. So, like, under the policy, like, check. We obviously aren't going to do it there. I think there's other areas where it's pretty simple. Like, we should be doing this. Like, there's a dirt path in the grass where we see people are like walking today, and that's, you know, indicating that there's use, but we provided like no type of infrastructure. So like those are the two bookends. Let me talk with the commissioner and other folks and look at how we kind of use that discretion in between there. I think more broadly, you raised a fair point about just design. And I think maybe that's something we can talk about, and we'll come back to you on. Commissioner, you have something you want to add?
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Lawson, as well as the full board, I just want to remind people that we do, for new construction activities, rehabilitation activities, we follow national standards on design. And many of those design standards have been well informed on safety statistics and things that have generated over a number of years. We follow the AASHTO Green Book on that design standard, as I'm sure you're well aware. That, however, when we look at right-of-way and right-of-way needs, we're trying to put things all into a very compressed space that includes the travel way, the drainage system, if it's an open drainage system, as well as the pedestrian accommodations that the board, as the Secretary has indicated, that there is a board policy out there that requires us to accommodate bicycle pedestrian activities on our facilities. Where they get set would be up to the developer at that point, if they're willing to make those separate accommodations, but that's truly on a case-by-case basis.
That's encouraging to hear. That's not been my experience. My experience has been you build both. You're going to comply with that standard and put it along the highway and do it internal. And I would suggest that we ought to, if we're looking at things, let's look at that, because I'm thinking if we separate these things, people are going to survive, not get hurt. But if we put them together, and I recognize the limits of right-of-way, it's just not going to end up well for the pedestrian and the bike.
I'm going to highlight a couple things, and we'll be back next month specifically talking about bicycle pedestrian activities, and we'll get much further into depth about that. But we need to remember, as we'll show in next month's presentation, pedestrians make up their own mind on where they're going to walk, and usually shortest path. And so while I can appreciate that there may be some dialogue or desire to move things further off of the right-of-way, it is still right-of-way, and it's still those individuals that are going to find the shortest path from point A to point B, regardless of whether a crosswalk exists, whether a sidewalk exists, or other things. And so I don't want to steal the thunder from Stephen for next month's activities on this thing, but there is a design standard. We will follow a design standard that is in existence. I think there are flexibilities that if someone wants to build a facility off and dedicate that right of way somewhere else, then I think that would be on a case-by-case basis. But when we're locked into a position where we're in constrained right-of-way and we are taking design features away from potential development activities, I could see that increasing the cost of the development as well. So I think next month we could have a more fulsome conversation on bicycle, pedestrian, or vulnerable road users and its implications.
Mr. Lawson, my takeaway from the commissioner's comment is yes, we are going to discuss that.
That's what I heard. I heard that as well, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, and again, and Ms. Green, I see your hand. I mean, like, just teasing out a philosophical question we'll have to struggle with is like, one, let's see where these things are happening, right? I don't know if it's like linearly along a stretch of road where the majority are happening, or if it's at intersections. We're going to hear that at future meetings, but there's also like a tension here between speed for the vehicles and the safety where they're in areas where there's lots of pedestrians. And like, let's be clear, that is a tension. But how we choose to like adjudicate that tension will also have impacts on what that like number is in the future. And I don't think there's like a one size fits all type of answer, right? So I'm not trying to imply that, but I just want to like highlight that that's something we're gonna have to talk about and struggle with like in these future types of meetings. So clearly it sounds like it's something we're definitely talking about. Since we're gonna start that next month, I expect it will take several months of discussion, but I appreciate you bringing that up. Ms. Green?
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Reed, will we also be looking at things like EVs and how the no sound impacts pedestrians and bicyclists? I just had a close friend who was struck by an EV. You don't hear them coming.
Well, what I'm sorry to hear about your friend. Mr. Reed, is that something that will be in those future presentations?
Mr. Secretary, Ms. Green, within the strategic plan, we have an emphasis area on connected and automated vehicles. For this previous plan, past couple of plans, it's been more of what are we seeing on the horizon? What's potential? When do we expect them to have more technology into the vehicle fleet, in the outer years, say 2040, 2050 kind of time frame. And so it's something that we're monitoring and we're looking at. I believe it would need to be DMV that would look into the actual vehicle types and whether or not there's EVs involved. And we'll need to talk to them about whether or not we get that specific data to look at, the influence of EVs. I know there's a lot of discussion right now with electric conveyances for micromobility, right? With what's an e-bike and a scooter and a mono kind of thing. And so that's difficult too, because those are not called out in the crash data. And so we have a whole area there where it's kind of evolving and we're trying to figure that out. And we'll work to do that.
Mr. Reed, one thing I'd ask you and Ms. Brubaker to look at whenever we're going to be discussing that potential topic is I also believe, though do not know, that NHTSA, I believe, has updated standards for hybrids and EVs to require them to start making a noise. I know I personally have a hybrid that makes this eerie alien sounding noise whenever I turn it on and it's in the electric mode. And so if we can maybe also understand, is that a discretionary choice certain automakers are making, or is that a federal requirement? And if so, like, when did it go in place? Because maybe the other thing is, unfortunately, we're in this period of time where we have some vehicles that predate that requirement, and will they be kind of transitioning? Like, is it going to grow as EVs potentially grow in the market? Are we going to have more silent ones, or is there a federal requirement so that they will all make, my words, probably not NHTSA's, the alien noise when they're kind of operating at those speeds?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So,
Ms. Dunlop.
question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I recognize very much that human behavior is hard to control. They're going to do what they want to do, and some of it's bad. But I'm struck by the fact that we've tried in this country to outlaw alcohol, and that didn't work well. So we have drunk drivers and easy accessibility to alcohol. And I believe that the General Assembly has taken action to control human behavior, or try to control human behavior as it deals with electronics. But what about drugs? I mean, should we be making drugs more easily accessible to humans? I'm concerned about that. When you have this as part of an impairment, and you have concerns about that, and we know we can't always control human behavior, but should we have laws that make drugs more easily accessible to people when we know it's going to result in impairment?
So, Ms. Elliff, I appreciate the question. I'm going to jump in for Mr. Reed here. So I would say that topic is outside of the kind of realm of VDOT and DMV's type of authority. I think what we can do and what our job should be is to quantify what we are seeing happening and why we think it is happening. At the end of the day, what is a legal substance for an adult to, what's the word? Possess. Thank you. I was like, it starts with a P. In the Commonwealth is something the General Assembly will make those determinations on. I think that our job is to kind of identify what is causing the situations that we're seeing, provide that information to them, and they can take that into account as they make those types of decisions. I understand what I'm saying may feel like a punt. I'm just trying to, within the kind of confines of the authority of this board and the role of VDOT and DMV, that question is slightly outside of it. I think what we should do is always quantify the impacts that we're seeing and make sure that those decision makers who do have authority over those types of decisions can see that as they make those types of decisions.
Did they get this information as they were making this decision? Do we know that?
Ms. Elliott, I was not here at the time when those bills were debated. This document was put out in 2022. So it was available to them. Whether or not they all requested it or took a look at it is something I don't know. I understand the point you're raising. It's for better or worse outside of the authority that of VDOT or DMV or this body. But I understand. Ms. Sellers.
Kind of to talk about what Ms. Dunlap's talking about, the General Assembly has put restraints on certain drugs over the last few years. So kratom, things what they called they call it gas station heroin. It starts with a T. Those have been, we've seen the General Assembly say those can't be sold in certain things. We have also seen the General Assembly allow the percentage of alcohol per volume increase. 2022, I believe, is one of the last times. So it used to be you couldn't sell above 7.5% outside of the ABC stores. We have seen that relaxed. But something to keep in mind when you talk about substance use is there's the legal definition of 0.08 and above, you qualify to get a DUI. And then there's everybody's different. So if what I use or what I drink is going to impact me differently than everybody else here. And so we have to understand that it's not just controlling human behavior, it's understanding that the biology and how things break down in the system and the chemical breakdown of these substances interact with the person. So it's very complicated. And when it comes to, substances, we can do a breathalyzer to check for alcohol. You can pull blood and we can see alcohol. It is very hard to see anything else. So, you pull urine or blood and urine typically, but we have to send that away to see how much is in. And so if somebody's a user of other substances, you're going to have to do it over time to watch that substance break down in their system. So my point is it's very complicated to look at substances and just say this person's intoxicated. It's mostly a behavioral thing because beyond alcohol, we can't really do that in a timely manner. And I know law enforcement has been talking about that for a really long time, but just want to point that out. And, we don't control human behavior, but you can encourage socially acceptable behavior. How we define that varies. And the interventions are earlier in the process. So just kind of want to put that out there. We can, encourage certain things, but when it comes to substances, it's just very complicated.
Mr. Davis, I will call you one second. So folks, I just want to note, we have about 15 more slides in this presentation. They're getting to some of the meat of these things. So we've talked about how many fatalities there are. We're going to start talking about where we're seeing the causes and other things over the past 5 years. So I just want to kind of note that is not to discourage conversation. I want to be clear. I just would highlight that as we have a fair amount left in this presentation. We haven't actually got to the meatier portions of it. We're at a pretty kind of high level right now. Mr. Davis.
Understood. I'll be brief. It seems incumbent then, if the General Assembly is going to pass things as it relates to recreational use of marijuana and things of that nature, it seems incumbent upon us to provide the education. And the reasons why you should not drive high. I think the lobbying effort as it relates to pushing that agenda seemed to me to bring it across as, oh, this is just like a cigarette. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. And I think it's incumbent upon us to provide the education as to why that's a poor choice. So beyond that, I think I don't know what's much we can do.
That's very fair, and I will just note before, and then Mr. Reed, you're going to go to the next slide, that the General Assembly this year, for example, as discussing whether or not you should be able to have an open alcohol container in your car, they actually carried the bill over because they were saying, well, how are we going to deal with a lit joint, for lack of a better term? I don't know what you call it, an open marijuana container, but that was kind of one of the discussions that was ongoing in the Senate this past year, and so they are having some of those conversations. Whether they are in the place we all might think they should be is, subject to debate, but it is a topic that they're discussing at the Assembly. So next slide, Mr. Reed.
So how do we define our emphasis areas? Fundamentally, we're looking at the crash outcomes that are disproportionate. So like the vulnerable users we saw earlier, behavioral issues that Ms. Brubaker will talk about and how that contributes to the problem, and the different road user types like the heavy vehicles and motorcyclists that are more vulnerable as well. So all of these emphasis areas have pretty much aligned with federal safety initiatives, different grant programs and whatnot for many, many years as well. So mentioned that the strategic plan is founded on the safe system approach, which is a new approach here in America that started in the 1990s in Europe. And there's 6 principles that go with it. One of the first ones is that safety is a shared responsibility. And so it's founded on having safe road users, safe roads, safe vehicles, and safe speeds, and then with the appropriate post-crash care. And of course, that's all supported by data-driven safety analytics. Under safe users, as I mentioned earlier, the impaired is those 4 Ds of drugged, drinking, distracted, and drowsy. And so we've kind of lumped them together in the plan as well, but there's different actions and implementation for each of those. You can see there safe speeds, and we'll be talking a lot about speeds in terms of safety. So it's not only safe operating speeds, but for those that are speeding, particularly to a high amount over the posted speed limits. So within these areas, just plotting the total serious injuries and fatalities here in the next slide. And we've added in what data we have available for 2025. And you can see that there wasn't a whole lot of improvement through 2024, except for a drop in those not using their seatbelt and roadway departure crashes, and those are related because you have a lot of roadway departures that are unbelted and speeding. With the 8% drop in 2025, we see other areas like bicyclists and motorcycles and intersection-related crashes beginning to come down. For pedestrians, serious injuries declined, but the pedestrian fatalities increased in the last year. So it's still a persistent problem with our pedestrians. Let's talk about where engineering is primarily responsible. For this month's presentation, we'll focus on locationally where our crash is happening. Are they at an intersection conflict point? Or are they along a roadway segment and a roadway departure? And then next month, as we've mentioned, we'll talk about the vulnerable in more detail. All of these crash types, speed is a major factor in our engineering of our vehicles and our roadways. Higher speeds increase risk because kinetic energy is transferred to a force at the time of the collision. And it's a power function. And so it increases a lot. The risk for a pedestrian increases, it doubles every 10 miles an hour. You increase the speed for a pedestrian. Interestingly, our crash tests that you see from IHS up in Greene County and from NHTSA, they're conducted at 40 miles an hour and 35 miles an hour. So even the vehicle above those speeds can potentially have a reduced effect on the safety of the occupants. Another thing about safety is conflict points. So the frequency and severity is directly related to the number of conflict points along the road. We cannot eliminate all of those, especially at intersections, but they're also along the roadway. So providing dedicated space for different users and different movements is important for highway safety. And also, we want to recognize another principle in the safe system is that people make mistakes. We have both the human behaviors that Ms. Brubaker will talk about and human factors, that we have physical and cognitive limits in terms of those that are using the road. Most of the way we process and drive and walk and ride is done visually. Most of the information comes in visibly. So roadway visibility is really a key component for our roadway design. So we keep these in mind. We have speed, we have conflict separation, and we have human limitations in terms of what we can do with our infrastructure.
Mr. Secretary,
Laird.
and I know it's going to be covered in depth in April, but I would like to see that we break out under the bicyclists the electric function of that versus just somebody riding a bike and a scooter, and how those numbers look relative to just a regular biker.
We will absolutely see what we can do on that, Mr. Laird. I want to manage expectations that we are often reliant on the police reports.
Sure.
And so I think we'll have some information. I'm going to speculate without basis, though, that information is going to be incomplete, but we will see what we can do on that front.
Mr. Secretary, Mr. Laird, so bicyclists are classified as a vehicle in the police crash report. However, the e-conveyances are not an indication in that. So in order to understand that, you basically need to read the narrative that the police officer gives and hope that he's indicated that situation. So it is there, but I would expect it's underreported. All right, let's talk about intersections. That average there of 310 is about a third of all fatalities, and we have about 40% of the serious injuries are at intersection conflict areas. Studies show that we have a 50% chance of death with a side impact or an angle crash. It's a 50-50 at 40 miles an hour, and that's where vehicles are tested with that impact.
What is an angle crash? I
T-bone.
read that. A T-bone?
Yes.
Okay.
An angle crash is a side impact crash, like it's tested. Yeah. So almost half of these are in the localities, the orange bar at the top. And overall, it's 46% of these severe crashes are in our urbanized areas. So rural intersections are spread out, but they are more severe because of the higher speeds. As you can see in the chart in the bottom right, when you get up over 45 there, that's where we have most of the numbers. And you can see that a lot of those are on the 4-lane roads, even down to 35 miles an hour for that. In terms of visibility and process information, you can see that they're overrepresented at night too. About 20 to 25% of our travel is at night in the dark, and we have over 33%, even with lighting, occurring at night. Now look at roadway departures, 454 That's almost half of our fatalities, our roadway departures. And you can see there that less of those are in our localities, and they're more on the US primary and secondary route in the rural situation. Of course, limited access, it switches, and it's more in the urban areas where we have higher VMT. So for these, we have fixed object crashes and head-on crashes. The chance of death for a fixed object crash is 50% at 35 miles an hour if you run off the road. If it's a head-on crash, it actually increases. Vehicles are made to take that collision force, and it's 50% at 50 miles an hour. So we can see here that a lot of these are on two-lane roads, particularly the higher speed ones that are in the rural situation. And again, they're at night. So roadway visibility of the roadway alignment ahead and what's coming in terms of the roadway and not running off the road is really critical for our design. So I'll conclude back with this interaction. And as I hand it off to Ms. Brubaker to talk about some of the behaviors here that when we look at roadway departure, which is 50% of our problem in terms of fatalities, we do need to look at the speed. We need to look at speeding drivers, and we need to look at impairment and other factors as well that overlap. And so I'll ask her to come here now and introduce some examples of what DMV Highway Safety Office is doing with our human behaviors and the choices that they make.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Ms. Brubaker, welcome up.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Reed, for providing a really helpful overview of the data and trends we're seeing across Virginia. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is to shift our focus from the numbers themselves to the people and behaviors behind them. I started my career as a news reporter on the police beat, covering crimes in courts, and that gave me the opportunity to cover countless crashes. And I reported on the worst moments of people's lives after they had lost family members in crashes on roadways. And that experience stays with me in the work that I do today because it reminds me that every data point that we analyze represents a person, a driver, a passenger, a pedestrian, and understanding those human behaviors is essential if we want to reduce crashes and save lives. So as we analyze crash data across Virginia, several emphasis areas consistently emerge where focused attention can have the greatest impact on reducing fatalities and serious injuries. These emphasis areas involve people walking and bicycling, motorcyclists, impaired driving, whether that involves alcohol, drugs, distraction, or drowsy driving, occupant protection, speed, heavy vehicles, and risk among both older and younger drivers. Each of these areas represents a different type of risk on our roadways, and each requires a different type of response. That's where DMV's Highway Safety Office spends much of our time. We work with partners across the Commonwealth, whether that's law enforcement, public health, schools, community organizations, and nonprofits, to address these risks through timely and accurate data, marketing campaigns, enforcement initiatives, training and grant programs that support local safety efforts. Many of the awareness campaigns that you see across Virginia, efforts to reduce impaired driving, increase seatbelt use, or improve pedestrian safety, are informed directly by the data that we are discussing today. But before we come back to the board to talk about specific strategies, the first step is making sure that we clearly understand what the data shows us and where the greatest risks exist. So one of the clearest signals in our crash data involves seatbelt use, which is a particular topic that I like to talk about. Over the past 5 years, 53% of people killed in crashes in Virginia were not wearing a seatbelt in vehicles equipped with safety restraints. 53%. That represents an average of 342 lives lost every year and more than 1,300 people seriously injured. That's almost one person a day who could still be with us if they had made the simple, life-saving decision to buckle up. Every morning, I read this report that details the fatal crashes that occurred the day before, and my eyes always go to the same place. It's the spot that says whether or not a person was wearing their seatbelt. And more often than not, that answer is no. And it's really hard to think about the fact that one simple decision could have changed all of that. When we look more closely at these crashes, some patterns become very clear. Most occur in rural areas, about 64%, and about half occur at night between 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. The majority of the victims are male, and the largest age group is young adults between 21 and 30. Many of these crashes occur on non-interstate roads, and a large share involves single vehicle crashes, which often means that the driver left the roadway. So when you put those pieces together, the picture that emerges is very specific. Young men driving on rural roads, often at night, often alone, not wearing their seatbelt, sometimes alcohol's involved. Because the data pointed so clearly to that audience, we recently designed an advertising campaign called Impact, which specifically targets young rural men and encourages seatbelt use. That campaign was built directly from the patterns we see in the crash data you're looking at today. But in our story, the hero wears his seatbelt and lives to fish another day. One of the other things our data shows us is that these behaviors rarely occur in isolation. Many serious crashes involve multiple risk factors at the same time. Over the past 5 years, crashes involving alcohol have resulted in more than 6,600 fatalities or serious injuries in Virginia. About half of those were the drinking drivers themselves. The other half were passengers, other drivers, or people sharing the road. But when we examine those crashes more closely, we see how the risks overlap. Among drinking drivers involved in fatal or serious injury crashes, 44% were not wearing a seatbelt, and more than half were speeding. Because how often do people drinking make sound decisions, right? In many of the most serious crashes, we're not just seeing one risky behavior, we're seeing several happening together. Dangerous choices lead to more dangerous choices. It adds up, and the risk to everyone on the road increases. When we step back and look at the data across Virginia, several problem areas clearly emerge. Intersections, particularly in urban areas, are a major location for crashes involving multiple road users. Roadway departures, when vehicles leave the roadway, are a leading cause of fatalities, especially on rural roads and often associated with speeding. We also see significant risks related to impairment, aging drivers navigating complex intersections, the list goes on. Each of these issues has different solutions with different levels of effectiveness and cost. And that's exactly the work we will return to the board to discuss in more detail. I'll close with this. Today we focused on the data, understanding where crashes are happening and who is most affected. In the months ahead, we will return to the board with clearly defined strategies aimed at addressing these risks and reducing fatalities and serious injuries across the Commonwealth. Because ultimately, this work, our work, is about one simple goal: making sure that when Virginians leave home, whether they're driving, walking, rolling, biking, or riding, they arrive safely. And every step we take together to understand these risks brings us closer to that goal. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for your leadership and your continued commitment to improving safety on Virginia's roadways.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman?
Yes, I just have personal experiences where I live in an urban area with bicyclists not obeying traffic laws. They blow through stop signs and traffic lights. Is that a part of calculus? I mean, I thought there were things, Mr. Minshew maybe could weigh in, but there are laws that they have to abide by the traffic laws. So motorists depend on that, but if you're making a right-hand turn with a green light and a bike comes blowing right through with a big hand that's red said, you know, don't pass. I think that's some interaction, and you started your slides with education. Is that part of this calculus for that?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. We like to say that everyone shares the road and everyone has a responsibility to follow the rules of the road. And we'd like to make sure that that all of our road users have the education that they need to be successful. So that includes, you know, sharing education with bicyclists, with and as it does with motorists. May is Bicycle Safety Month, so that's coming up.
And Mr. Coleman, I would say, I think at next month's presentation, when we talk a little bit more about some of the pedestrian bicycle items, we'll get into like where are we seeing these severe injuries and crashes and what do we think are some of the causes. And so I think it will be a good thing to kind of look into more detail at that time. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's certainly something we'll look at. You are correct. Like a bicycle, as Mr. Reed noted, is a vehicle in terms of like when they're on a street and they are in turn required to follow the law. I should also note and foreshadow to Mr. Hutchinson's presentation, there are debates about changing how those laws work in terms of how they relate to bicyclists. Those discussions will be ongoing into the next General Assembly session. But so we'll certainly get into that at the next meeting, but I also just wanted to highlight for the board, the rules of the road may or may not change sometime in the next 2 years because there's an active and ongoing discussion about that at the Assembly. Ms. Sellers.
Do we look at animals at all? Do we take that into consideration?
Reed? You raised.
Secretary Ms. Sellers, very timely question. VDOT has just finished, I think, the first in the nation look at the risk of large mammal crashes. And so we're definitely looking into that situation to determine, you know, what can be done for that in terms of mitigating that risk as well.
Because DCR has like their wildlife, I think it's
Correct.
DCR, right, where they
That's
rehab
correct.
these animals? Yeah.
That's correct.
PWR, Commissioner.
Oh, DWR. And then when we look at these intersections, do we account for if they're turning on red?
We can see that if they didn't obey the traffic control, yes,
I
ma'am.
think it's Arlington that just changed, maybe in the last 2 years, where you cannot turn on red. And so that would be interesting. And then kind of as just a comment, when I see the slide with particularly young men in the 21 to 30 age group, they're a challenging group, period. You know, and you talk with law enforcement, certainly mental health, and judges, you know, young men, because it's not just a choice. It's also the impulsivity. It's also, you know, the masculinity and just things, you know, going on with our young men. And so I think it's probably more than this. This is a symptom of perhaps a bigger issue than just, hey, put your seatbelt on, because yeah, men are they're a challenging crew, and just to kind of throw that out there.
I'm hearing no disagreements with your point, Ms. Sellers, so I'm going to move on to Ms. Dunlop.
Yes, thank you both for these excellent presentations. Are bicycles required to have licenses like automobiles are?
No, they are not.
They are not. So that may be something that should be required. If they're going to use the road, they should have a license. We really ought to think about that. And then my second point is one of the most impactful ads I've ever seen is a person who suffered the results of smoking. And I'm just thinking, when you do your ad for these young men, it might be worth considering having a young man who has lost a lot communicate, I once, and now I am. And I just think that the whole idea of instead of laws and regulations, human interest in education in that way can be very powerful even for these irascible young men. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dunlap. Are there any other questions for either Ms. Brubaker or Mr. Reed? Well, thank you both for this presentation. Obviously, we've seen a fair amount of interest in this topic. Great news because it's coming back. So, again, this is what do we think is happening? We'll start to dig deeper into those and then also start to bring back potential options for how we can invest the dollars we have available, both behaviorally, but also on the infrastructure side. And again, I think a core area I'm going to keep pushing the board on is, are we using these dollars to drive the greatest impact? And how can we do that? And how can we do that in a way where we're addressing issues throughout the state? So a lot of the topics we talked about yesterday in Smart Scale, just in kind of a different issue. And again, because there's no applications that local governments get to submit for this program, this is kind of a board-driven process, but I'd argue as impactful as Smart Scale to the communities that you kind of represent here on the board. So again, this will be an ongoing dialogue with a kind of a culmination towards the end of the year. And so really appreciate your engagement on this topic. And thank you again, Mr. Reed and Ms. Brubaker. Next, we have Carter Hutchinson to give us a legislative update. I do just want to note for Mr. Hutchinson's sake, before we get going, we are still in an active state with the General Assembly. And what I mean by that is we are always technically active in this period. So again, just as a quick refresher, the General Assembly is here in the long session for 60 days. They then go home, but not for the year. They go home for a period of time. During that period of time, the administration reviews, the governor, actually reviews all of the pieces of legislation that were sent to their desk, and they can sign them, they can amend them, and they can veto them. The General Assembly comes back for what's called veto session. That's going to be on the 22nd of April, and normally that is the kind of end of session. And the General Assembly kind of deals with obviously the vetoes or amendments, and then depending on the vote total, there can be action afterwards by the governor. We have a slightly different circumstance and situation this year where the budget was not adopted before the end of the normal 60-day session. And so the General Assembly is going to have a special session the day after veto session to continue to discuss the budget. So there's a lot of questions I suspect you may have, and then I similarly suspect you may find our answers to be slightly unsatisfying as we are still in an active kind of engagement with the Assembly on these topics. This is not us trying to be opaque or not provide kind of fulsome answers. It is simply a reflection of where the legislative process is at this point. In future years, I suspect in March, we will be able to give you more definitive answers on a number of topics, but because of where we are, with the legislative process this year, the answers will not be as fulsome at this time. And again, that's not us withholding. It's just a reflection of where we are. So Mr. Hutchinson, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I couldn't do this with you yesterday afternoon, but here we are. This morning I'll be giving you a quick overview of our two transportation committees and just the bandwidth of legislation through them this past session. Next, I will go over some of the key agency bills that were put forward at the end of last year for this session and the ones that were successful. Next, I'll go over a couple of other key transportation bills that were not agency bills, and then I'll wrap up with some of the key items that were proposed in the state budget that the Secretary just referenced. We don't know the final disposition of yet, but they were in one or both of the House or Senate proposed amendments to the state budget. Obviously, please let me know if you have any questions. So the House Committee on Transportation, chaired by Delegate Carrie Delaney of Western Fairfax County, as of the final week of session when we put these statistics together, the House Transportation Bill heard 102 separate pieces of legislation and reported 84 of those bills to the House floor. You could see below there the number of bills that were continued to the next session, as well as bills that were defeated or struck at the request of the patron. And down to the Senate Committee on Transportation, chaired by Senator Lamont Bagby of Richmond. As of the final week of session, when we compiled these statistics, 114 bills had been heard by that committee. 72 of those were reported to the Senate floor. And again, you could see below some of the dispositions of bills that were not reported to the Senate floor. Next, we'll go over just some of the more high-level agency legislation that was put forward this year. And obviously, if you have any detailed questions about these, I might phone a friend, but I should be able to handle any sort of basic questions. Senator Danica Rome and Delegate David Reed carried legislation on behalf of VDOT this year that grants Virginia the authority, as roughly 9 other states currently have, which is to have delegated NEPA environmental authority on the state level. This is actually quite a significant accomplishment, particularly since nobody voted against it. And I think a lot of credit goes to VDOT and their team for doing that, for accomplishing that. And so this will allow VDOT to have the ability to analyze and consider state requirements and objectives, such as a project's potential impact to greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, and environmental justice communities. Additionally, this will help the state react to some of the cuts that have been happening on the federal level, the federal agencies that have slowed down the approval process. And we'd be happy to get more detail for anybody that has any questions about that positive move, but we're looking forward to the implementation of that legislation.
And Mr. Hutchinson, I just want to really just pause for a second. This is a big deal. Like it's a short bill, it doesn't have a ton of words in it, but in terms of like impactful things that have currently passed the General Assembly, this is an impactful piece of legislation. So I just want to like commend, the commissioner and his team, one, for putting together this proposal. I also want to thank the environmental community who worked with VDOT on this proposal. This was supported both by the contractors and the environmental community and was an agency bill. So like, doesn't happen a lot on a topic of this nature. And so to me, that like demonstrates the kind of cooperation and coordination that took place. So again, to all parties, internal and external state government, like thank you for all working together to allow this to kind of get across the finish line. This lets us control our destiny on a lot of these approvals and reviews and not have to rely on whether or not the federal agencies are staffed to a level that allows for kind of timely review of these permitting, areas. So just really, this is a big deal. It's also going to be a lot of work for VDOT. So like, let's recognize that, standing up kind of the program, putting in place those processes and procedures. And so I know the commissioner and his team are going to be busy in the coming months, assuming this legislation is signed by the governor, though, VDOT did speak in support of it during session. So I'll just highlight that point. But this is a really impactful piece of legislation that is passed. It sounds very simple and kind of boring and benign, but this is going to make a difference on a number of projects in the Commonwealth. Ms. Dunlap?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your title says Delegated NEPA Authority for the Commonwealth. Does this mean that all NEPA authority for the Commonwealth is delegated to VDOT?
I think I'll phone a friend.
There's no other state agency involved in this process, is what you're saying?
Secretary, Ms. Dunlop, no, this is delegated authority from USDOT to VDOT. So for the commissioner to enter into an agreement with USDOT. Yeah.
And Ms. Deem, just to add further context to that, to Ms. Dunlop's question, what VDOT is assuming is the role that FHW plays. There's still going to be engagement with federal resource agencies on permitting and a whole variety of other types of tasks, but we now can step into the shoes of FHWA.
We become the lead federal agency, so it will involve engagement with a number of other of the environmental agencies you may be thinking of, where we'll be the lead instead of Federal Highway.
Sellers?
Did it come with more money? Is there a complementing?
So as we noted yesterday, all the transportation agencies are non-general fund agencies. And so we operate within the budgetary resources that are provided from the Commonwealth Transportation Fund.
Can we monitor how much it costs and send the federal government a bill and say, if we're doing your job, can you?
So Ms. Sellers, in all seriousness, we do not expect this to have a monetary impact on the state. Today, we prepare these documents We then work with the federal agencies as they review them. So we are effectively doing all of the steps involved. And then we are waiting for someone else to break bread kind of over that. All we're taking away is now we break the bread, we put all the documents out. We then are obviously subject to any kind of judicial challenges if folks have concerns with the work that we've done. And I would say that in the past, when there have been judicial challenges to the work, even when FHWA was the lead, we participated in those lawsuits in the second chair. And I would say the second chair was more active in most of those cases than the first chair. And so again, we don't expect increased cost from this. And we actually expect on a number of projects, the approval will be quicker, which will reduce some of the inflationary impacts we've experienced on a number of projects where we've experienced delays.
Well, I'd still monitor it, working with the federal government for as long, because eventually it can be said, whatever money is going to FHWA now to do this, if the states are able to do it cheaper and more effective and efficiently, then the tax dollars should come to where it's going, and it can be argued and taken to the congressional delegation. That's just my opinion. You know, I get the effective and the efficient, but we also need to think about money here.
So every 5 or so years, Congress debates what the federal transportation policy will be. I suspect if more and more states take this over, there may be a discussion. I want to be clear for the FHWA representatives currently listening. We are not going to be having that discussion with Congress, at least from the executive branch side at the moment, as they debate that policy. Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, just as the former Chief Counsel of Federal Highways and General Counsel of USDOT, I can clearly assert that this is a great deal for the Commonwealth, notwithstanding that we won't getting paid what federal highways might otherwise spend on this. Federal requirements on highway projects in particular add up to about 30% of the cost of a project. This takes a huge chunk out of that. So we might not getting cash. There will likely be an enormous savings to the Commonwealth. The fact that the commissioner and his team can be running these processes and not have to double check with federal highways at every step along the way, being in the position to be able to break the bread as opposed to waiting on a federal agency to act, yeah, will result in significant savings to us both in time and money. So
how much money's in that budget for this process? I'm kidding. I mean, in the federal level.
We'd be happy to follow up offline on this particular topic. Mr. Hutchinson?
Yeah, I would just add as well that I believe Ohio saves somewhere in the order of $4 to $13 million a year from them taking this authority on. So something for folks to keep in mind. So another agency bill from the Department of Transportation that has to do with safety. So this will allow for a 5-year, 5 to 6 year pilot program by VDOT that would allow them to use what's called a truck-mounted attenuator. And what that is essentially a remote-controlled work utility truck, the ones that have the big sort of safety barriers on the back of them. So, you know, those are already used to a great deal, but there's a severe safety risk for the drivers of those vehicles that you see in safety zones that have the big infrastructure on the back of them that's supposed to protect from a crash. Those are still very dangerous positions for those workers to be in. And so what this bill would do that was carried by Senator Srinivasan and Delegate Glass of Norfolk would allow VDOT to deploy in a pilot program basis. So it would have to be reauthorized by the General Assembly in 2030 to be continued, is to allow VDOT workers on site in those mobile work zones to position those trucks where they need to be and then convert them to remote control so they can be on the side of the road and then steer those around in a mobile work zone. And so this would be a pilot program again, so the results and the effectiveness of that program will be obviously shared with the General Assembly and with other policymakers like yourselves.
Sellers.
Are these those trucks we saw in Blacksburg? So these were developed there or tested there at the site in Blacksburg?
Secretary, Ms. Sellers, yes, these are the vehicles that you saw that were being tested at the time. We've deployed them with human drivers in them in real life work zones. What this legislation allows us to do is to take that driver out of the vehicle at this point in time, In fact, I've got a meeting this afternoon about how we can deploy additional vehicles and outfit them now that the legislation is anticipated to be signed into law. That would give us that flexibility to be able to move this forward.
That's a great project, not just for safety, but to show the utility of that program and the smart road and all that stuff going on in Blacksburg. That's a great thing.
Down to the last two, I believe, agency bills we're going to update y'all on today. These were both agency bills, or I should say authority bill, but we kind of call them all agency bills for the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. Both of these bills, HB 141 and HB 446, are essentially bills that would align VPRA with authorities that similarly situated transportation agencies or authorities have in Virginia. And so House Bill 141, which has to do with exemptions from certain fees, on a high level, it would exempt the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority from land record access fees charged by clerks of court. This is an exemption that VDOT currently already has. This would give that exemption to VPRA as well. And another major exemption as part of 141 is that it would exempt VPRA from dredging fees that must be paid to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. This is another exemption that VDOT enjoys already. Another significant one is that it would exempt VPRA from Virginia, from VITA regulations. This is an exemption that the Port Authority already enjoys. And then lastly, House Bill 446, carried by Delegate Simon. This, on a high level, would align VDOT's condemnation authority with other public bodies that develop longitudinal transportation projects in Virginia. So it would require, on a high level, it would clarify that all VPRA property is uniformly exempted from local subdivision ordinances, whether acquired from a railroad or other type of landowner. And it would also replace VPRA's quick take process with the process that local governments are allowed to use currently. There's a number of other components to that, and we'd be happy to follow up with you directly if you have some questions about that.
And so, members of the board, the takeaway I would encourage you to have about these last two bills is VPRA was created in 2020. They've started moving forward with projects. We've run into a few places where they experience kind of outcomes we weren't expecting because of how their authorities were drafted as they implemented those projects. And these bills are intended to just align kind of how they can behave as they're pursuing and advancing a project with similar types of transportation agencies in those circumstances. And so, you know, when we wrote that statute in 2020, we were had just announced the CSX deal. We hadn't finished the kind of final negotiations. And so we've learned a lot since then. And so, you know, I think these are kind of common sense clarifications to the authority that the rail authority has as they try and move forward with kind of a large construction project and program.
Okay, so on the topic of other key transportation bills debated, these were not agency bills like the ones we just discussed. A subject that y'all probably heard a fair amount about. I think we could estimate there were a number of bills to increase revenues for transportation and transit. They all had different approaches and different components. So we had a package that was carried by Senator Survell and Delegate Sullivan that was really kind of initiated by the work of the DMV Moves Committee that you all heard about yesterday. That was originally carried on the House side by Delegate Sickles, who is now, as y'all may know, the Secretary of Finance. So that's how Delegate Sullivan took on that legislative effort with Senator Survell. Like these other bills here, this bill was continued by the Senate Finance Committee on the Senate side and the House Finance Committee on the House side. Continued meaning that they would be, instead of debated in standalone legislation, would actually be incorporated into the budget debate in some form or fashion. And so you will see on a later slide the degree to which some of these concepts, or at least funding levels, were incorporated into the budget debate. Similar disposition was taken on Delegate Vivian Watts's bill that would have raised revenues not only for transportation and transit, but across the board for other general fund purposes in Virginia. That was also continued to the next session with the understanding that it would be part of the budget debate. The same is true for the last bill you see on here, House Bill 1179, carried by Delegate Tran.
And so folks, yesterday we talked about DMV moves. A number of comments were made about how revenues should be raised. Like my takeaway, again, for this slide is there's ongoing discussions. We don't know what those will, what the outcome of those will be. As Mr. Hutchinson noted, that could be something that's adjudicated in the budget. It could be something that continues into next session. It could be something that continues into many sessions into the future there. But it is an active kind of topic. Ms. Sellers, specifically to your point, those first two pieces of legislation would have raised around $460 million, give or take, on a statewide basis for transportation. And those funds did flow to all modes of transportation and across all parts of the state. The final piece of legislation down there that we see referenced did raise a variety of potential taxes and fees. Those were focused exclusively on transit. So again, there's a variety of topics here. I do not know what the General Assembly is going to do, but there's a whole host of topics. And so some of these expanded the sales tax base and cut the rate. Other expanded the base and didn't cut the rate. Others looked at different types of ways of potentially generating revenue for these purposes. The takeaway here is that this discussion is ongoing, and that may be resolved in the month of April. It may be resolved in the year of 2027, or it may be resolved at a time after that. But it is an ongoing kind of debate and discussion at the Assembly.
Advocate.
I am not providing any value judgment on any of these pieces of legislation. The administration during the Assembly, as it is now, has no position on any of these pending pieces of legislation, but individuals may do whatever they see fit. We are just kind of providing information on the discussion that took place.
Secretary.
Mr. Mitchell?
Mr. Secretary, great presentation. The term carried over may have changed since I was there, but if a bill can only be carried over from a even numbered year long session, as I recall, and if it's carried over to the odd numbered short session year, the bills are there, they've been referred to a committee. And so when we get into the 2027 session, the patrons don't have to refile the bills. Basically, the chair of the committees can bring them back. One of you could just touch upon procedurally these bills that are carried over in committee. How do they come back to life in 2027?
Justin?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question, Mr. Minshew. I think the safest answer that we could give you is that it really is up to the chair of the committee. So I have known the circumstances where a legislator has had to refile a bill that has been carried over. I think if the chair wants to resuscitate a bill that has been carried over, though, that's certainly with the prerogative of the chair.
Thank you.
And the other thing that I would just kind of add as a point that we've certainly shared with advocates in this space is that there is no scenario in which the budget leaders in the General Assembly would not be involved in a decision of this magnitude. And so no one should, I think, get discouraged that these bills were taken into the bosom of the Budget Committee leadership, because that would need to happen regardless.
Ms. Dunlop.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm sorry to go back to your transportation legislation agenda, but I'm curious about the condemnation authority legislation. This will allow VPRA to condemn private property owned land for the purpose of rail transportation. Is that what
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And what happens to land that has been condemned, private property land that has been condemned for rail that ultimately then is no longer used for rail?
That's a great question, Ms. Dunlop. The bill actually speaks to that. It would require the VPRA to offer surplus property acquired by condemnation to the prior owner first.
is that forward, or does that also take into consideration past land in Virginia taken by?
No, that's in the bill as it is in the governor's review period. So it would be a forward-looking policy, not retroactive.
That would be a good governor's amendment, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Ms. Dunlap.
Okay, so on to another topic that was touched on in depth a little bit earlier on our discussion of safety, and a topic that I know all of y'all are familiar with to some degree. A big topic for legislation this session, as the Secretary noted, is legislation on photo speed monitoring. So here you have roughly half dozen bills that were introduced having varying degrees on this topic. And so the Secretary mentioned that a big theme of legislation that was successful this year is the idea of putting certain guardrails around the use of this technology rather than expanding that technology at this time, expanding the footprint of the use of that technology at this time. And so a number of the bills that were not successful this year were ones that focused more on expanding the places that this technology can be used. I think the General Assembly policymakers expressed to us in their decisions here that the legislation putting greater guardrails, greater due process requirements on those on the use of speed cameras were the goal of the General Assembly this year. And so in some ways we think that's positive because it is something that seems to need to happen. And so I'll run through these fairly quickly. Each of these, the update on here was in the final week of session. So you'll see the final two bills on here were not successful. All of the ones above them that say pending, they were ultimately successful. And so Senate Bill 59 from Senator Diggs and House Bill 684 from Delegate Hayes, identical legislation that will require the Department of Criminal Justice Services to develop a training program for law enforcement on how to better implement the use of this technology. And there are a couple of requirements as far as due process for violators in that bill. Then Senate Bill 84 by Senator Williams Graves of Norfolk, another bill that was successful, includes some due process requirements and as well includes a change that I know VDOT cares very much about, which is allowing state police to recover their own costs for the deployment of speed camera technology. That is something that is a positive change from VDOT's perspective, that no longer has to come out of their budget. So VSP is obviously very supportive of that as well. And another point on that is this bill, Senate Bill 84, and another one below, the Secretary mentioned this initiative from the General Assembly earlier as well. It speaks to whether it's a Virginia State Police speed camera or whether it's a local law enforcement speed camera. Senate Bill 84 will require that the first call for revenue from those civil violations goes to paying for the program itself, either on the local level or VSP's program on the state level for folks found to be violating under the state speed cameras managed by VSP. And so once the local revenue pays for the program, then any excess funds now under this legislation will have to be directed by the local government to safety improvements on the local level instead of just being general funds, which is the disposition of those funds today. And that requirement also requires those expenditures at the local level to not only be safety in general, but also be safety programming or investments that would be eligible under Virginia's Highway Safety Plan. So it requires some alignment there. And then for civil violations that are paid through VSP's speed cameras, so paid to the state, first would go to state police recovering the costs of managing that speed camera program, and then any excess funds would be directly deposited into the Virginia Highway Safety Program instead of which will create hopefully, some moderate increase in funds that are available to the Virginia Highway Safety Program.
Secretary,
Sellers.
are these the ones in school zones and work zones and in intersections? And the only reason I ask is because for the school ones, the Safe Routes to School used to be funded, I think, under TAP. And now
So we
challenge, though.
will get to the school. There are a couple of school bills, but this has to do with the highway safety speed cameras, not school zones.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Jones of Richmond had a bill that also ultimately passed out of both chambers. This also includes the requirement that I just mentioned that was present in the Williams-Graves bill about requiring localities to spend this money on safety instead of allowing them to use it for general funds. Senator Bagby's bill, more narrow, Senate Bill 436, that bill simply requires that there be a worker present in a safety worker zone, because I think there is some concern from perhaps stakeholders somewhere that maybe there is uncertainty about whether there's an actual worker present or not. And so this just clarifies that there must be at least one worker present for photo speed monitoring devices to be deployed in highway work zones. And then lastly, Delegate Delaney's bill is a bit of an omnibus bill that touches on all these subjects, incorporates all of these ideas. So the ones that I mentioned already, I won't repeat, but it also directs the Virginia Supreme Court to develop a uniform summons that will be used for all violators under this, under highway photo speed monitoring devices, whether local or VSP. And also, importantly, lowers from 60 to 21 days the amount of time that photographic information pertaining to someone can be retained by the locality or the state unless a summons has been issued. A couple of other hot topics that were debated this session. That should say House Bill 1120, my apologies, and then Senate Bill 670. This is identical legislation that ultimately did not pass the House Transportation Committee this year, that would have sped up the deployment of fully autonomous vehicle use in Virginia. There were a couple of different versions of this idea as it moved through the legislative process in those delegate and senators' bills, respectively. Ultimately, I think there were concerns by enough members of the House Transportation Committee that this bill would have superseded a work group that actually was established last year that has representatives from the administration and agencies in it that is already making recommendations that are due to be reported out this coming November on recommendations for the authorization of AVs in Virginia. And so I think on a higher level, there seemed to be some support for allowing that work group to continue its work and complete its work this fall. So ultimately, those bills did not pass House Transportation Committee. And then lastly, as was touched on by you, Mr. Coleman, I think earlier, and the Secretary mentioned, there's been a 5-year or so effort, perhaps longer, to change the way that bicycles, as well as these other non-cars that you could see listed in this bill title, what traffic laws they have to follow. And this bill, again, was not successful on the Senate side, although you can see that it passed unanimously on the House side. This bill contains a number of components that include, I think, what some folks call the Idaho stop, which allows bicyclists to not stop at stop signs if it's under a certain amount of lanes at that intersection. There's some components that also amend how the state permits two abreast riding on roads that are less than 35 miles an hour. And then there's another component that has to do with allowing bicyclists to go ahead and start crossing an intersection when the walk sign turns on for pedestrians, as opposed to having to wait until the red light for vehicles. A lot of questions about this legislation, not only from legislators, but from some of us as well, making sure that we understand the full implications of it. One thing that certainly seems to come up and was a concern expressed by the Senate when it continued this bill to next session was the applicability of this expansion of authority to non-bicyclists. As you can see here, even in just the bill title, there's a number of electric power assisted bicycles and things, and I think there were questions from senators about how comfortable they felt with that technology at this stage. So that's where that bill was left for now. Couple of other key transportation bills for you all to be aware of. There was House Joint Resolution 28 carried by Delegate Askew. This bill was successful and will establish a joint subcommittee to study public transit systems in the Hampton Roads region. And we've already had a couple of conversations with Patron on that legislation, and he's very excited about the opportunity that might present. The second bill you see here is somewhat related, House Bill 1241, Delegate Jackie Glass of Norfolk, the Hampton Roads Infrastructure Coordination and Readiness Framework. And then lastly, you have legislation there that's supported by a number of pro-transit stakeholders that you see here, House Bill 564 carried by Delegate Reed and Senate Bill 583 carried by Senator Salim. This will allow localities to install cameras on buses that would only look at whether or not somebody is obstructing a dedicated bus lane or bus stop. The legislation is very restrictive in that it only allows images to be captured of vehicles that are blocking or obstructing a bus stop or a bus lane, and that information is only eligible to be used for that purpose and that purpose alone, enforcing that violation. And so you could see here that that legislation was successful. There's a number of I think local governments and transit stakeholders that are encouraged at the mobility and speeding up of transit travel that will allow. So,
Guys, I want to stress we're now pivoting into the budget from this slide on. This is all, we're going to be describing things that are either in the House or Senate version. Neither of these have passed both chambers because that act hasn't happened. And so this is just describing the transportation issues that are still at play in the budget, which is still under negotiation.
Yep, and so what you will see here is just a reminder of some of the needs that we were presented to us in more detail yesterday in the DMV Moves presentation. But as a reminder of the operating and capital needs at WMATA, as well as, and that should say 153 million, in FY27, not $153. But the House, as you can see here, proposed amendments to the state budget that were an infusion of general funds. This would be allowed to be carried forward in the second fiscal year. So essentially this is both years of the budget and allocation of general funds. But I think as such, and I think this was communicated in the budget documents released by the House Appropriations Committee, this is more or less a likely one-time infusion of surplus general funds to address this cost that is an ongoing cost. And then amendments to the state budget that were proposed by the Senate speak more to a little bit of an ongoing structure. So the state Senate proposed some changes to both, you all have, I'm sure, heard about a number of them, but some changes to tax rates and tax exemptions and how those monies would flow through into the regional taxing authorities for transportation would essentially provide 85 million next year and 207 million, excuse me, in FY28. And that would be in not just WMATA funds, but across the board, transportation and transit. There's some additional regional changes that would provide additional capital funds, as you can see below there.
And just for everyone's kind of expectation management, the revenues are coming from the main tax policy issue that is subject to discussion between the House and Senate. And so this is all related to whether the sales tax exemptions for data centers continues or is sunset at an earlier date. And so, that first amount there that Mr. Hutchinson referenced, again, it would be statewide revenues that flow through the formula, which Ms. Pryor talked about yesterday. And then that second bullet there is the regional type of revenues for the WMATA capital related to kind of the increase in the Northern Virginia region. There's a lot of data centers in Northern Virginia. So if you're saying this looks slightly unproportional, that is correct. It's just based again on the location of where those facilities are.
Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Smoot.
is it correct that none of these would fully, if adopted, would fully address the $400 million issue that was brought to our attention yesterday?
What I would say, Mr. Smoot, is the House budget does part of what was discussed there. The Senate budget proposes to do a different part of what is discussed there. So neither part individually does all of the things, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary,
Celeste.
is there any discussion, maybe today or in the future, of talking about the operating or the increased operating needs associated with all these new roads in Northern Virginia through the Transportation Authority that we've talked about?
I believe the commissioner will be coming next month. It's the start of a several months presentation on it, kind of updating his comprehensive review of operations and maintenance across the Commonwealth. And so that's going to be looking at the kind of funding needs to maintain a sustainable performance outcomes for our infrastructure. And I suspect in that we'll have a discussion of expansions to the system.
So a couple of other interesting items to note in the proposed amendments to the state budget. This first bullet here, continuing Hampton Roads toll relief. This is a proposed budget amendment that is actually in both the House and Senate proposed amendments to the state budget. What this will allow is increased flexibility to allow the Commonwealth to pay more than 50% of the cost of the discount to low-income drivers in Portsmouth and Norfolk. Without that flexibility, we would not be able to fund that through the biennium. And so that's what that change proposes. And again, that is in both the House and Senate budgets. Second, you see...
Really quick, Mr. Hutchinson. So just members of the board, the Assembly created 2 years ago a low-income toll relief program to provide discounts for residents meeting certain income thresholds in Norfolk and Portsmouth for use of the downtown and midtown tunnels. This program had been in existence for a long time. I should say they expanded it significantly then, and so it provides a free round trip, if you will, each day for those users through the tunnels. In the past, this program wasn't always fully subscribed. What we've have had happen, which you could say is a good thing, is we are subscribed at a rate higher than we anticipated, and so we needed some legislative flexibility to ensure that we could continue to provide that full discount to folks. I want to stress that we are not providing the concessionaire is still providing every dollar that it is supposed to provide. So it is not as if they have stepped back from any of the financial commitments that they've made. It's just due to the success of the marketing of this program, we have a higher number of participants than were envisioned when we originally set up that structure.
And then lastly, you see on this slide a study directing the Secretary of Transportation to work with his counterparts in the District of Columbia and Maryland to review ticket and registration reciprocity. This includes a requirement on reviewing how reciprocity is handled for tickets issued to Virginia drivers by the District of Columbia through automated ticket enforcement, and options for how Virginia could enter reciprocity agreements for automated tickets. Obviously, Secretary.
I feel obligated to note that if we have these discussions, we will also be talking about toll reciprocity with these jurisdictions. So, you know, we have more toll roads in Virginia than we do automated enforcement. They have more automated enforcement than they do toll roads in DC. And so if we're talking about one, I very much will be talking about both. And so we'll have those discussions.
What does that mean?
So
Reciprocity. So they want to try and enforce Virginians paying the tickets?
That's exactly what that means.
Well, and their constituents paying our tickets too.
I just should draw a distinction today. If you speed in another jurisdiction, we have reciprocity if a police officer pulls you over. What we don't have is, or if a police officer pulls you over for running a toll booth. We do not have that for if you drive through an easy pass thing, you get the, you get the mail and you're like, that's fun, and you throw it away. There's no ability for us to ensure users from other states pay besides continually mailing them notices and saying you should pay and then turning it over to debt collectors, which can be frustrating, but does not require compliance. And the same thing for the kind of speed cameras, if you will.
And that proposal is in both the proposed House and Senate amendments to the budget. A few more here. Affordable housing near transportation. This is an amendment proposed by both the House and Senate as well that directs the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation to conduct a statewide study to plan, promote, and identify funding opportunities for transit-oriented development around existing and proposed transit and rail stations. And the Department of Housing and Community Development is directed to assist DRPT with this effort. Very exciting opportunity, and I think we're pleased that both the Senate and House agree. And lastly, on this slide, the House directs the Secretary of Transportation in coordination with the Secretary of Commerce and Trade to identify federal funding opportunities to expand electric vehicle charging infrastructure in rural areas. On this slide, the first bullet is study language that was included in the House budget. This language directs the Secretary of Transportation to study and evaluate options for accelerating large-scale improvements to the Interstate 81 corridor. This study language expressly requires that any such analysis done has to assume that there shall always be 2 toll-free lanes in each direction on Interstate 81. And then lastly on this slide, this is a budget amendment proposed by the House that lines up with the House Joint Resolution 28 study for Hampton Roads Transit. So this is a $300,000 appropriation to support the work of that joint subcommittee. First on this slide, you'll see a budget amendment proposed by the Senate that directs the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to evaluate the feasibility of some partial or more than partial consolidation of the Northern Virginia various bus agencies and transit agencies. There are some details there as to how DRPT is directed to do that, a number of specific data points to investigate. And then lastly on this slide, another proposal from the Senate that directs the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to study the feasibility of imposing a tax on paid parking in private or commercial parking lots and garages, excluding residential parking within localities in the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And that is the last slide.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Before we take questions, just a quick reminder again, folks, we're in the middle of this legislative session. I expect at the May meeting, we'll have a whole host of updates, which is my way of saying at the April meeting, we are not going to have updates on the adjudication of these particular topics, but we'd be happy to direct any questions to Mr. Hutchinson that y'all might have. Mr. Minchu.
Thank you. A great presentation. We appreciate it. Back on the Metro WMATA funding, as I recall, the SJR, Senator Adam Evans Subcommittee and DMV Move suggested around $400 million a year of new sustained funding, maybe with an indexing of 3% per year. And I see the 153 million number up there. Obviously, there was a delta between 400 million and 153 million. If we are to get to that 400 million in new funding annually, would the balance between the 400 and the 153, if this budget were to be approved, come from local funding partners, the federal government? I think the goal was 1.2 divided between Maryland, Virginia, and DC, our share being around 400 million. So I guess I'm just wondering if this budget were to be approved with 153 million a year, how close are we to getting to the 400 million number? If that's clear enough.
Thank you, Mr. Minshew. I know that the secretary will jump in to correct me if needed, but my understanding is, there were a range of needs projected by both DMV Moves and separately by the SJ28 committee. And I don't think, it's a range. That would be my answer.
So, Mr. Minshew, I think the way I would encourage you to think about that 400 million is there's first, several years ago, the region agreed to increase the operating subsidy that was provided to WMATA. That is 153 million of that 400. That bill is coming due on July 1, no matter what the General Assembly chooses to do. What the General Assembly's action is doing is determining how that bill is paid. And so what the House is proposing is that at least for the next 2 years, which is what happened the previous 2 years, is the state would split that bill with the local governments, which would generically stay in line with a kind of informal practice that the state and the region split the WMATA bill. The Senate provides some limited but more ongoing funding to WMATA operations there. But what the Senate does that the House does not do is it does provide the full 136 million a year to provide the 460 to address the state of good repair of the WMATA system. And so in that instance, they are saying, yes, we believe we should make these investments in the state of good repair of the system, and here's the funding to do so. By absence of the other funding, they're saying here's some money towards that 153 a year, but it's dramatically less than the half. And so again, in a way, the House is doing one part of the ask, the Senate is doing another part of the ask, and then neither candidly are fully addressing the full request that was identified by SJ28 for the other agencies, that is.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Mr. Hutchinson? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, folks, that concludes our workshop agenda. We'll bring that to a conclusion. The action meeting is brought back into order. We're going to jump straight into the agenda, recognizing the hour. Ms. Schul, you are up with resolution number 1.
Hello. This is a resolution to adopt the consent agenda as was discussed yesterday.
Move approval.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Thank you, Ms. Schul. And Ms. Mathis was kind enough to remind me that in my haste to move forward, I actually skipped the approval of the February minutes. So I would like to bring that item before the board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, those are approved.
Mr. Secretary, I would vote in the abstention since I wasn't here.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. The record will reflect that. Next, we have Mr. Gregg.
Morning, Secretary, members of the board. I'm here today. I have 3 commemorative namings for you this morning, for your consideration this morning. The first is a little different than we normally have. This one is for a state agency person that was killed in the line of duty. This is commemorative naming of the bridge on US Route 21, Elk Creek Parkway over Elk Creek in Grayson County as the Master Officer Jeremy Lewis Hall Memorial Bridge. In accordance with the code, Joseph W. Walters, Director of the Department of Corrections, on January 23, 2026, submitted a letter requiring the CTB to name the bridge on US 21 Elk Creek Parkway over Elk Creek in Grayson County for Master Officer Jeremy Lewis Hall, who lost his life in the line of duty with the Department of Corrections. According to that letter, Master Officer Hall joined the Virginia Department of Corrections in April of 2024 and worked at River North Correctional Center. On November 17, 2025, Master Officer Jeremy Lewis Hall was assaulted by an inmate and shortly after succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced deceased while in the hospital. On January 8, 2026, Grayson County Board of Supervisors approved their support for this commemorative naming and provided formal notice of their approval in a letter submitted to the Secretary of Transportation on January 22, 2026. VDOT recommends your approval of this request.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Ms. Dunlap?
On behalf of my colleague, Mr. Folks, I would like to move approval of this.
Second?
Second.
With all those in favor, please stand. Motion carries. Mr. Gregg?
Second one for your consideration is a commemorative naming at the request of the Buchanan County Board of Supervisors of the bridge on Route 609 Bull Creek Road over the Vista Fork River, Buchanan County, as a Francis Gary Powers Memorial Bridge. The Buchanan County Board of Supervisors enacted a resolution on February 2nd, 2026 to honor the life and service to his community and country of Captain Francis Gary Powers. According to that resolution, Captain Powers was a Buchanan County resident and a 1946 Grundy High School graduate. He was born in 1929 in Jenkins, Kentucky. After graduating with a bachelor's degree from Milligan College in Tennessee in 1950, he enlisted in the United States Air Force in October 1950. Captain Powers was an American pilot in the United States Air Force, was a CIA employee. He was best known for his involvement in the 1960 U-2 incident, where he was shot down while flying a secret CIA spy mission over the Soviet Union. Captain Powers survived, but was captured and sentenced to 10 years in a Soviet prison for espionage. He served 21 months of that sentence before being released in a prisoner swap in 1962. After Captain Powers returned to the United States, he worked at Lockheed as a test pilot for the U-2 and later a helicopter pilot for Los Angeles news station KNBC. Captain Powers died in 1977. VDOT recommends your approval for this request.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Ms. Dunlap?
Yes, I move the approval of this.
Second. All those in favor, please stand. Carries. Mr. Gregg?
Last one we have this morning is a commemorative naming at the request of the Fairfax County of the bridge on State Route 193, Georgetown Pike, over Difficult Run, Fairfax County, as the John J. Adams Memorial Bridge. The Fairfax County Board of Supervisors enacted a resolution on February 10th, 2026 to honor the life and service to his community of John J. Adams. According to that resolution, John J. Adams was a founding member of the Georgetown Pike and Potomac River Association that worked to prevent the Burling Tract from being developed, and because of these preservation efforts, the area became Scotts Run Park. Mr. Adams and the Georgetown Pike and Potomac River Association worked tirelessly with the Board of Supervisors and members of the General Assembly to create the designation a scenic and historic byway historic roads in the Commonwealth. Due in large part to the efforts of Mr. Adams, Georgetown Pike was declared Virginia's first scenic and historic byway in 1974. Mr. Adams passed away on April 20th, 2025, and members of the community wish to recognize his dedication to the preservation of the Georgetown Pike. VDOT recommends your approval of this request.
Mr. Secretary, as Mr. Minshew knows Mr. Adams, I'll defer to him to make the motion.
I'll be glad to make the motion to approve and speak to the motion, Mr. Secretary. I knew John Adams. I went to high school with his children. And in addition to being one of the leading forces that led the Georgetown Pike, formerly a toll road, to become the first Virginia State Scenic Road, circa 1974, I think. If you look in the minutes of this CTB, you'll probably find he testified in front of this board in 1974. But he had many years of being a profoundly good and smart and ethical citizen advocate. I'll give you an example. Georgetown Pike, given it's a state scenic road, also has some historic districts. There's the Langley Fork Historic District near where Senator Robert Kennedy's home was. And the VDOT proposed back in the 90s some safety improvements in that area. And they had to go through could be described as a double 106 review. Historic district and a state scenic byway. And you can probably imagine it took some sensitivity working with the state historic preservation officer and the citizens to do that. And one thing that VDOT did, and I commend Mr. Adams because he was a exemplar of a citizen activist who was constructed with VDOT and to give a good product. If you were to, I think that the first time I saw Mr. Britch, the rustable guardrails that instead of having a bright silver galvanized look, have this nice brown patina that kind of fits in with the historic district. It's the first time I ever saw it done. And I think it came out of this work. So I'd be glad to make this motion. Mr. Adams died back in the spring of last year. And I don't make my appointment. And thank you, Mr. Goodman, for the opportunity to make a motion in your district.
You're welcome, and I'll second that motion.
Very much. All those in favor, please stand. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Gregg. And board members, I ask for your indulgence for 1 minute. We're going to stand at ease while I just consult with our council on a particular issue related to the action you took on resolution number 1. Sorry. The board will come to order. I appreciate your flexibility. I was just consulting with our council with your action on resolution 1, whether or not we should needed to amend the agenda to create the consent agenda. That seems like a lot of extra work when I can just ask you to take items 5, 7, 8, and 11 in a block. Those are all items that would otherwise fall in the consent agenda per the resolution you approved on item 1. And so I know typically we would have someone come up and present for each of these. These are all different people. So as the chair of the board, I'm actually just going to ask for a motion to move in a block resolutions 5, 7, 8, and 11. I hear a motion from Ms. Sellers. Do I have a second? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Next month, now that you've adopted the policy, you'll see the resolution structured slightly differently, or the agenda, excuse me, structured differently with all these items listed in a consent agenda, which will be our first item. So thank you very much for your flexibility and patience there. Next, we have Mr. Smizek. Oh, we have a stand-in for Mr. Smizek.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm Chris Swanson, VDOT's Environmental Division Director. I'll actually be stepping in for Scott to discuss the resolution that you have before you to identify the location. I do have a few slides as well. The location of the preferred alternative for the City of Virginia Beach's Nimmo Parkway Phase 7B project. During the February workshop, you were briefed on the recommended preferred alternative. At that workshop, we shared that we were still working through the public involvement period to inform your decision. So that public involvement has now been completed, and I want to take a few minutes just to summarize the results of that effort. I do have some statistics to share with you, so I may give it a quick minute to try to get these slides up. Okay, I can talk you through them. You do have the slides in your packet as well. So as a reminder, our recommendation on the preferred alternative is the Nimmo Parkway alternative, which extends existing Nimmo Parkway by 1.8 miles to connect to existing Sandbridge Road. That recommendation is informed by an endorsement of the city and was presented to the public as such. The comment period included announcements of a virtual and in-person hearing, as well as opportunities to view and comment on those materials outside of those meetings. In total, the comment period ran from January 20th to March 2nd, during which time we received 432 comments and one letter sent by several advocacy groups as a joint letter. And those are listed on the slide in your packet. And it was also referenced by Mr. Pollard this morning during public comment. Overall, 58% of the comments received were in support of the preferred alternative, with 20% in opposition. The remainder of those comments ranged from supporting the preferred with modification or to not responding to the question related to preference. So just a quick summary of the public comments we received. They were focused on safety, traffic speed, bike ped access. The city's engineering has advanced to a point where the city is confident that it can meet all the required safety measures, but it awaits this decision to advance further detailed design that is necessary to demonstrate that. There were also comments related to environmental impacts, to wetlands, streams, and wildlife habitat associated in and around the Back Bay Wildlife Refuge. While the EIS is not approved for public availability yet, VDOT's done enough work to understand that the potential impacts do not influence the recommendation on the location. The joint letter from the advocacy group touched on similar topics, but with a focus on conducting more analysis, including consideration of modifications to the Sandbridge alternative that may make it less impactful. VDOT's confident that the questions raised by these groups related to impacts will be analyzed and addressed in the NEPA and permitting processes and will be complete before the city advances to construction. We're pleased at the level of public involvement to date, as it's not just informed this process, but also it will continue to inform the development of the EIS. None of the comments, however, have caused the city or VDOT to alter its recommendation, and we recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Do I have a motion?
Move.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Ms. Pryor with item number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. The first item I have for you today is approval of the monthly transfers. You should have a copy of the transfer report in your packet. I would point out that there are 2 construction district grant transfers on the report that require approval. One is in Stanton and one is in Richmond, and the additional information is attached to the transfer report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I recommend your approval.
Thank you, Ms. Pryor. Do we have a motion? Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Yep. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, I believe you have item number 10, Ms. Pryor.
Yes, the next item I have for your consideration is a resolution providing approval for the commissioner to enter into an agreement with VIPRA to serve as the administrator to seek out financing for the Long Bridge project. You were briefed on this last month. You had a draft of the agreement in your packet last month. I would point out there's a slight modification to that agreement. The original agreement specifically referenced TIFIA as the financing instrument. We've changed that to just say project financing to give more flexibility in case the market changes and another instrument becomes more beneficial. With that, I recommend your approval.
Thank you. Any
So
questions?
moved.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Pryor. Next, we have Mr. Coker. I believe we have 4 bids today. Because we just have 4, I'm not going to move any in a block. I believe some are in range and some are exceed the range, and look forward to hearing about those.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I have 4 projects today for your consideration. First project is order number 480 in the Richmond District. This is UPC 127956. This is a 2026 plant mix project on the interstate in Henrico and Chesterfield counties. We received 2 bids. The low bidder was $7.8 million from Allen Myers. This does exceed the range. I'm recommending award. This is the second time we've advertised this project. We received the same 2 bidders. These are historically the same 2 bidders that bid on this type of project in this region. The price did go down from the previous advertisement when it was also exceeded the range, and we rejected the project. So I'm recommending an award for this.
Questions? Do I have a motion? Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, next project is order number 481. Again, this is the Richmond District UPC 127957. This is another 2026 plant mix project on the interstate in Henrico County. We received 2 bids. Low bidder was just below $5.4 million from Allen Myers. This does exceed the range. Same reason as the other one. Second time bid, same bidders, historically the same bidders. The price did go down, so I'm recommending award.
Questions? Ms. Sellers?
Is there enough, how much it costs us to bid these out? Do we see enough reduction in the reduction in the overall cost to justify it? If that makes sense? I don't even know the question. Are we wasting our time sending these out for 2 bids if these are the only people who are gonna bid?
So historically, we do see reductions in pricing, and it is worth the effort to rebid it. The proposal's already generated. Sometimes there are some small modifications, but for the most part, it's a fairly simple process for us to rebid a project.
Have a motion?
I move approval.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Next project is order number 283 in the Salem District. This is UPC 127369. This is a 2026 plant mix project on the primary systems in Henry and Patrick counties. We received a single bid from Adams Construction Company for just under $9.9 million. This is within range, and I recommend award.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, I believe this is our last bid.
Okay, this is our last project for today. This is order number DB 139 in the Bristol District. This is UPC 124241. This is a design build project. The scope is intersection improvements for US 11 and Old Airport Road in the city of Bristol. We received 3 bids. The best value was from Branch Civil for just under $24 million. This is within range, and I'm recommending award.
Questions?
Move approval.
Thank you. Do I have a second? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coker.
Thank you, sir.
Folks, before we conclude, that's the concludes all of the business that we have. I wanted to give Director Zimmerman just a moment to bring up a few items. I did skip over the Director, Commissioner, and Secretary's update. Ms. Zimmerman does have some things that were timely, and so I wanted to give her the opportunity to just talk about those. So I appreciate your indulgence here for a few minutes.
Great, thank you. And I actually don't need to go through the whole slide deck, so I'll spare you that. But I do encourage you to look at the full slide deck. But a couple of things I wanted to just note out. First and foremost, today is Transit Operator Appreciation Day. So we have over 2,500 transit operators moving over 400,000 people every day on our transit systems. That's not counting WMATA. As we mentioned yesterday, with WMATA, that does carry 92 million Virginians. Those are trips starting or ending in Virginia. Overall for WMATA, it's a much bigger number of 265 million trips that are carried on WMATA. Both bus and rail, but our transit operators do a great job. These are really tough jobs to have. I think most people would prefer not to be driving in traffic or not to be driving long distances on some of those rural roads. Really important for the life, the safety, the livelihood, and the healthcare access that they're providing to people. So I just wanted to thank our transit operators across the Commonwealth. I hope you will all also join me in thanking our riders, and maybe if you haven't already done it this trip, in a future trip, it's very easy to hop on the Pulse right outside of the building here, and you can see kind of what that experience is like here in Richmond or in your own communities. So I wanted to shout out for them today, and all month is Transit Appreciation Month. I did also just want to note on the ridership front, for the state, we were up 9% overall last year with transit ridership. WMATA was up 11% with its ridership, but we also had some really impressive ridership increases by OmniRide, by Loudoun County Transit that were up over 20% from the year before. And so I think, again, we're seeing some good trends here in Virginia. We want to keep that moving, keep that happening There's also some materials I won't talk about in depth right now because I hope we're going to have a chance later in the year to talk about some of the rural transit needs. We talked a lot yesterday and today about Northern Virginia and their needs, but I just want to note we have growing needs for transit in our rural communities, and they have some real challenges with capital and operating costs, especially on the paratransit side. These are not only public transit agencies, but also private nonprofit providers. A lot of times they're driving a van or a very small shuttle. The costs of those have increased. In 2021, you could have bought one of those little shuttle buses for around $63,000. Today, it's over $127,000 for that same vehicle. So that's a huge increase in a short time. And we also have a significantly growing older population, which I always say that's a good alternative. You want to grow old. But with that, we have expanded needs on the transit side, especially for paratransit and for some of those rural communities. So I wanted to note that. And then the last thing I'll just flag is we did kick off the end of last week public outreach to inform the statewide rail plan. We update this every 5 years. The Federal Railroad Administration has some guidance for us on what we need to do in that process. That plan will not come to CTB for approval, but we will be updating you along the way with that plan and that process. It's for both freight rail and for passenger rail, really kind of looking out over the next 5 years and what are the needs there. We're working with VDOT as part of that to address railroad crossing, which is a huge safety issue as well. But the public comment period is open through March 27th. So we would love to hear from you as CTB members, but also encourage you to let other stakeholders you might work with know that we want to hear from them as we're working on developing that plan over the next several months. So with that, thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Director Zimmerman. And then the other thing, board members, just as the final item before we close, is we will be sending out a draft calendar for the remainder of the year to you, either later today or early tomorrow. When we send that to you, it will be posted online, because any correspondence to you all as a body is also public information. And so please take a look at that. If you have any questions, follow up with Ms. Mathis. And again, we will do our best to answer those either before the April meeting or with any discussion at that time. Again, the goal here is to give you a sense of what is coming. It is flexible. This is the first time we've done this. So again, I would just ask for your patience as we inevitably potentially get something slightly off in terms of timing, but we are again working to provide you with that sense of what is coming. And the more we do it, the better we'll get at it. But this is our kind of first attempt as we've worked together with the various agencies to kind of give you this glide path of what will be coming, which again, hopefully means we'll be getting materials to you sooner. And just please always remember there will be ad hoc stuff as well. These are just the things we could calendar with kind of advance notice and warning. So thank you very much again for coming yesterday and today. I really appreciate your attention and engagement to this. That's what makes all of this work. So thank you a lot for doing that. And I look forward to seeing you next month. And obviously, if you need anything in the interim, you know how to reach us. And that concludes today's meeting.